Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's our pleasure to have with us tonight a very nice young lady, Ania Grigoran. Welcome, Ania.
Hello.
We don't routinely have such nice young ladies at our little TV show, but it's great to have you here. And one of the issues that confronts the world, and particularly young people, would be the problems with life adjustments that can sometimes go astray and lead people into harming themselves. And Ania, I think you've had some interest at a very young age, having seen the way the world is, to maybe making a difference in regards to that. And maybe you could discuss a little bit of how you became interested in such an issue and what you propose to do about it.
Yes. Well, I grew up seeing my sister struggle with depression and anxiety, so obviously I saw the different sides of that and how it affected her. But then when I started to struggle with my own, it was kind of interesting for me just to look back at now, because when you think about it, I think that most people think of mental illnesses as, even though they are really invisible, they can show themselves in, you know, physical symptoms in different ways, but people always assume that we're asking for help. And so I know that people always say, you know, look for the signs, or that they believe someone might be asking for help, and they always look for the signs for help. But one of the things that I found interesting is that I didn't even want help when I was struggling, is that I didn't want anyone to help me, or I didn't want anyone to just check in at all. So just looking back at everything that I've gone through, it really does make me sad for the different people that struggle with mental illnesses now, looking at it from a different perspective, because even though I want to help so many of them, some of them don't even want to be helped. So that side of it is kind of what brought me into being interested into psychology and things like that.
Well, that's a really commendable ambition. And actually, there are substantial numbers of suicides out there. I think I see them in my line of work. It's always a tragic, bad thing, because people can really, this is not a necessary event. It's something that's preventable, and we can do something about it. One thing, and maybe you can talk about that from the ladies' angle, the preponderant number of suicides are guys, are they not? I mean, they're the people most likely to take immediate action. And you have any comments about that? I mean, is there the anxiety and difficulties that young ladies experience are separate than, I think, their brothers or other male?
Yes, I do
people.
believe that women are more susceptible in general to mental illnesses, and particularly eating disorders, just because of the way society has portrayed the ideal body standard and things like that. It's really hard to deal with that, and especially now, I know a lot of people my age have social media, so they scroll and they see the ideal body image, and for me it's really difficult. So I can only imagine how other people struggle with it, but I do know that even though so many women are more susceptible, that men, I guess, they don't get enough recognition, just because people really focus on women struggling with mental illnesses, that no one really seems to check in on the men, I guess.
I think that's something to consider. I mean, I think often I've seen, there are very tragic stories in the world about young boys that have similar issues, and they choose to take their own life in terrible circumstances. And in general, when something like this happens, I think we could say it's a terrible tragedy. And you're sort of, if I can say this, you're sort of passing through a time of life when the high seas are afoot, and storm toss. I don't know when the storms go away, but obviously there's some pretty violent storms as a young person. And I think you've established a website, is that right? Why don't you discuss that a little bit, about how you've tried to make a difference in regards to this problem?
Well, I started by receiving a lot of messages on various social media platforms, and it was thousands of people actually reaching out to me asking about how they're feeling, and they asked for my opinion on what they were struggling with. So I tried to get back to as many as I could, but since there were so many of them, it kind of made me realize the need for people my age. They needed so much help, and I remember that when I really struggled, like my darkest times, I would look for websites or just different resources, and everything was sort of done from a clinical perspective. It was always doctors creating websites or just facts and things like that. And I just really wasn't interested because I didn't want that sort of treatment. I just wanted someone who understood the way that I was specifically feeling. So I wanted to create something for people my age to use as a resource and to not have to sort of feel as if a doctor was treating them.
Yes, and so you have sort of a more, I guess, understanding of what's going on, and maybe a little more sympathy, or understanding of these early life storms. Now, would you like to just go through the website? Would you want to do that?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Why don't we take steps in that direction?
Sure. So on the main homepage, the main idea will sort of be different blasts of color, just so it's more childlike and, you know, that sort of aspect of really connecting with the person that,
yes,
whoever's reading it. So I kind of wanted to add like little messages that I'm there for that person or viewer, whoever it is. And most of the people will be in my age range.
yes.
So that's why I sort of did different colors to, you know, reach out to that age range. And there are different resources that you can scroll down to find. But also at the very end, you can add your name, your email, and just anything that that person would be feeling. They can fill out a little form so that they can subscribe to any emails or resources that I might send out through my email. So that's the main homepage. And then on the next page, it's one of my drawings actually that I drew in my darkest times, I would say.
Well, that's pretty spooky.
Yeah,
That's pretty
it is
spooky.
quite scary, but I guess people that are struggling, when they see that, it is comforting, which is kind of strange to think about. But when you see something that you relate to, even though it is very scary, it's really comforting, honestly. It's like a hug.
Oh, really?
Yes, like
yes.
when I drew those, it was almost as if I was getting everything out,
Yes.
anything that I was feeling. And so I talk about the different emotions that most people feel, any human, just basic emotions, but then also the exaggerated amount of emotion that you need for it to actually become a problem in your life. And there will be different videos on my website, so some of them will talk about my struggles
Yes.
and how I came to make this website, but also various ones will talk about the different disorders or illnesses that I'll mention in the website.
Yes.
And resources for those as well.
Well, if you, if a young person uses this and they then offer up their name and ask for help, how do they receive that? What would be your plan in regards to that?
Well, that's sort of why I added a page called My Blog, and that'll be where people can talk about how they're feeling, because I remember more specifically that when I was struggling, I wanted to talk about how I was feeling in a space where I didn't have an immediate response, because I didn't want that sort of connection almost. I just wanted to get it out and just to see how other people felt. So I would find websites with resources and workbook pages, but nothing for me to allow myself to get out my own emotions. So the blog is sort of following that idea that they can talk about how they're feeling, and then the same people can respond back and they can sort of connect on the different similar emotions or things that they struggle with.
Yes. Now, in considering the way the world is, there are a lot of drugs that float around out in the world. Do you think any comments on that? I mean, obviously you're a traveler in this age cohort. People are there, and you have insights into the things that matter to young people, and the bad things, the good things. And my understanding is that drugs are commonly available in many circles. And what is the impact, do you think, from your perspective, on mental illness and then possibly taking steps to hurt oneself? Any thoughts on that or comments?
Yes, well, I definitely think that, for example, suicidal ideation and seeing that in someone that's struggling, it is very hard to identify. So you really have to be on the lookout, which is why I include specific resources that people find the different things you're supposed to look for. So there is a section in the website where people that are not struggling, more specifically the family or friends of a person that they believe is struggling, they can click on that part of the website and they can find different resources or tools to help someone or to identify when someone is struggling. So there will be a lot of facts about that, and more specifically for the suicidal ideation, it really is something that it's just so hard to deal with and help other people that struggle with it. But I do know that ignoring it is just not an option. So I really think that finding a website like this, or just finding some sort of resource that's comforting in the sense it'll help them with just feeling
Well, that's
better
kind of an
all the time.
extraordinary idea to do this. Did you sort of come up with the idea yourself, or are there other websites out there that you could emulate, or any thoughts about that? It's pretty extraordinary, I think, that a young person would take such a step.
Thank you so much. Well, I do think when I was struggling, I definitely didn't have this idea. I didn't even think that I would make anything like this possible, or even make it so far to make something like this. So I think the idea sort of came from everything that I've gone through. I just look back at it and I think about the people I was around in hospitals or various areas of treatment. It really made me cry for so long, because I can't imagine going through that again. Like, when you're going through it, you don't really realize how awful it is.
Yes.
You're just struggling and waiting to get better.
Yes.
But now that I look back, it's so awful that you can't imagine it until you go through it.
Yes.
So I just wanted to do absolutely anything to help those people.
Yes.
And at my age, it's kind of hard to find a way to help people, I guess, especially with these sort of things, which is why I wanted to study psychology and things like that. But even before that, I wanted to do something more direct for these people.
Well, one of the things that I think we could call you brave is to, exposing yourself in such an effort, and it's really quite noble. To take that step, and it must have been quite a searching experience, particularly for a young girl who I think their vulnerabilities are out there. I mean, what do I know about these things? But I think many times, as you mentioned, the female body image is of great consequence, or what people say, or the mean girls may say something. What do I know about these things? But to actually, the general tendency would be to be secretive and just not discuss the difficulties. And the fact that you've chosen to do that is pretty extraordinary. Has that been a difficult journey to get to that point? I mean, must have been not easy.
Thank you. Yes, it was pretty hard, I have to say. And in the beginning of the process to get better, I will say that I was not open about it at all. I would definitely distance myself from pretty much everyone. And I honestly would say that most people didn't know I was struggling. They kind of noticed that I was just quieter.
Yes.
So
is that a bad sign? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I would take it as a sign that you should check in on someone.
If young ladies are quiet, we have to be careful.
Exactly.
All right.
And so I know that most people that struggle with these sort of things learn to really hide their emotions pretty well. So I learned how to do that pretty fast.
Yes.
And
yes.
As I got through breaking through that and I got more and more help, I did realize that it is okay to open up about these things.
Yes.
And no matter how many times, if you would have told me that before, I wouldn't have believed you. So it really does take a while finally accept that. So it was pretty long.
Yes, yes. And so you mentioned your ambitions to help other people, and I know you're from a physician family, if we could say that, and would you plan to go in that direction with your future life journey?
Yes, I would really love to somehow help people in the field of psychology, and I think that mainly stems from the way I've connected with people that have helped me in my past, so my psychiatrists and different psychologists. The connection and just the way that they helped me just sort of made me realize that it really is incredible. Like the different doctors that help you with various things, the psychiatrists, the way they take care of your emotional well-being, you just really do connect with them, and that's sort of the way that I want to connect with people in the future, to help them so that they really can rely on me and trust me, not just to medicate them and treat them,
Yes,
but
yes.
to be their friend and sort of help them through those different things. So I would love to be a psychiatrist for adolescents, or
Yes.
maybe a psychologist for adolescents, something definitely to do with psychology.
You know, one of the things I've observed in my journey, so to speak, is that these terrible tragedies happen episodically with young people that end their lives. And what I've seen a little bit is just suddenly a black cloud arises, and in a period of great emotion, people just jump off the bridge, so to speak, and if they don't have there's not a sense of, well, I need to think of this over, or maybe talk to somebody. And has that been your thought about this, that when people are on the edge, if there's no life raft close at hand, then they often might go the wrong direction? I think particularly with males, I'm talking about males a little bit, in that they often, in my experiences, they're very circumspect about their opinions, and they're very reserved, and then suddenly something happens, and unaware, and this terrible tragedy happens. I'm just asking that question: is the suicide risk, the gender differences? Comments about that?
Yes, I do
crossing that
think-
gender bridge to
Yeah.
this vulnerable population.
I do think that men in general are just held to such a higher standard in terms of the need to be strong,
Yes.
because just barely any of my friends, I know that men versus women, like the woman will, they'll typically open up to me at some point, but the men, they just really have to hold in their emotion and be strong because society tells them to be strong. So I do think that when a man starts to feel that sort of darkness in their mind, it is really hard to get it out of their mind, because they don't even want to tell you that it's there. So even though the rates they're really high, but men will typically go through with the suicidal acts, and even though women go through with them, it's not as severe, I would say. Like it might be a form of suicide or harming yourself, but typically the men really, they just take it as far as they can because they don't want to tell anyone about it.
Yes. What about risky behavior for a young person that it might not be overt suicide, so to speak, but it's a suicidal a behavior pattern that is going to lead to physical and emotional harm? Just driving too fast, driving when drunk, maybe drug ingestion sometimes is kind of a suicidal thing. Is there a way that you could reach people that might be in that dangerous group for protect them?
Yes. Well, the different impulsive, acts those are sort of symptoms of so many different mental illnesses that it is really hard to know why someone has to act that way. But I would say that so many of those different acts do stem from wanting to hurt yourself in some way. So even restricting or binging in terms of eating is a way of forming a suicidal pattern. And no one really does realize that. So I think that finding that sort of audience, or just those people to reach, really, you have to find the root, of their pain, because most people jump to those impulsive behaviors and acts because of the pain they're feeling. So I guess it all comes down to helping them just feel sort of comforted and finding different ways of self-care and just tools for them to use a different behavior instead of these impulsive ones.
Is anorexia a kind of suicide, or do you have any thoughts?
I would say so. Most people think it's all about eating, but deep down, eating disorders, they really do not have anything to do with eating. It's just that sense of control. It sort of shows you that a person needs to control one part of their life because everything else is so out of control and their mind just has no idea what to do at that point. So I do think that eating disorders, especially, the mortality rate is so high because you might look perfectly healthy and no one would assume that you're struggling with eating, but even restricting or purging or binging for a short period of time can be so devastating to your body that it really is a form of suicide, but no one does realize it. So if you're not recovering from an eating disorder, you really are dying until you get that help.
Yes. Now, another thing I've seen about the gender differences in suicide is I'd say men generally take a gun and do something. It's a little bit unusual for ladies to do that, but they take pills. And any comments about that, like access to a big bottle of sleeping pills? I've seen tragedies in my medical career about some just, I'm going to terminate life by the easiest way possible and access to medication to do that. Any thoughts about that? Is that a tripwire for people at risk if they are seemingly fairly normal and there's a big bottle of sleeping pills and they've had some kind of difficult experience that might be something to be careful about? Any thoughts about that? Access to, I think guys, maybe guns would be a similar kind of thing. If you're a young man and you're very upset and there's a gun there, then that might be what happens. And ladies, maybe their preference would be something like sleeping pills. Any comments about that? The dangers of having medication like that around the house for a person at risk?
I do think it's a very serious issue that most people wouldn't consider in terms of suicide, because sleeping pills, there's a specific amount you have to take, and there's just so many different things that come into that act. So I guess when people start showing the suicidal patterns and behaviors, you really have to pay attention, because no one's going to expect someone, and it could be the happy girl, the popular guy. It's just you never expect the person to do something like that until they do. So it's always a threat having medication or things like that at such easy access, and there's not much you can do about it, honestly, other than just look for the signs. Again, even though it is hard to do, I think more people need to be aware of how to look for those signs just to expect something like that to happen.
Is there a stress point in a young person's life that causes particular vulnerability? I think, for instance, in Japan, South Korea, they have these big examinations, and it's a terrifically stressful time. And there's so much pressure on the young person. The exam is coming up, and then that has led to suicide. And are there stress points in a young person's life that could tip one over? I don't know how hard these SATs are these days, or your interviews, and there's a lot of family pressure to do one thing or another, and the feeling of inadequacy that I just couldn't do that, I'm worthless. Any thoughts about that? I mean, those issues.
Yes. That's a perfect question to ask me, honestly, because school was so hard for me and just really killed me mentally. It was absolutely awful. So for me, school was honestly one of the biggest struggles I had, especially when I was struggling mentally.
Yes.
My darkest times, I think school was the hardest to deal with, because you have to wake up at 8 in the morning, go to school, talk to everyone that you're friends with, talk to your teachers, get your work done, get A's, get this and this and this.
Right, yes.
And so I do think that school plays a huge role because you have 4 years and everything you do in those 4 years matters. So it is just incredibly stressful for people my age, and some people do handle stress better than others do, and that's really great for them, but some people just can't do it. So I will say that school just really wears down on a person. So I know that most colleges are going SAT optional and those testing. So that has really helped people my age. I know that for a fact, that it is calming, especially for me. I was really grateful to hear that most schools don't need the scores, because that is something that is just so hard, especially if you struggled so much in those 4 years of your life. You can't really, go back. So it's just, you look back and you're like, there's not much I could have done. I was struggling mentally. So I do think that, school, it's sort of, you really have to think about your mental health first.
Yes, I think that's good. Well, let me warn you about medcats. It's a pretty ferocious thing that might be in front of you as you approach a career in medicine. Well, let me ask you about this. You have the advantage of a rather diverse cultural background. You have relatives in different places. Have you, in observing other societies, other places, do you have any issues about the mental health there? For instance, in Armenia or Poland? I mean, the stresses are different for young people. You have any thoughts about that? I mean, how do different cultural milieus impact a young person's journey through life?
Yes, I do think in comparison, the U.S. and the healthcare system here, I think more people are aware of the different mental health issues and more people look out for the signs, and I really do think the help is there. But in comparison, in Poland, it is kind of sad because I have so many cousins and so many friends over there that talk about their struggles to me, and no one really helps them. There's no access to psychologists. I mean, there is access, but in comparison to life over here, it really is a huge difference. So it is kind of sad to see that over in Europe, no one would think about it, but so many people I know have wanted to just end their life in some way, or they've struggled so severely that you can tell that they need help. It's not just one sad day. And I do think that the difference is there. You can definitely see that people need so much help over there, and they're not getting it as easily as you can get it over here, for sure.
Well, let me ask this question about cultural issues. Poland is a very Catholic country. Does that have an impact one way or the other on a young person's happiness and journey? It might be good, it might be bad. I hope it's good, but I mean, any thoughts about that? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I really think it depends on the family and the person. I will say that when you're struggling, and even in your faith, in that Catholicism, if you keep hearing like, just pray to God, just trusting God, it'll all be okay, it becomes annoying. Honestly, it really does.
Yes, yes.
Because you just want that help, and sometimes you need the medical help. So I will say that the families that rely solely on one aspect or another, you just got to have that combination. But I know that in Europe, in Poland especially, as you said, it is very religious, but my generation, like the teenagers, are typically straying away from that.
Yes. Which
it is sad to see, but it makes it more obvious that religion doesn't play as much of a factor on their lives.
Well, it's been a real pleasure having you here on our little TV show, and I wish you well, and you're obviously a very special person, and your journey through life, I'm sure, is going to help many people, and that's a great thing. So thank you for being here.
It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.